Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to host David Fradin today. The first thing I'd like to note is that we would like for you to answer in the chat the question, which is, what is the number one thing you would like to get from this webinar? You can keep on answering the questions as we go along. A couple of notes on this session. First, you should note that this session is being recorded, and at the end of this David's session, or at the end, towards the end of the session, we should also have time for Q&A. A few words on ISPMA. So ISPMA is basically a group of practitioners, researchers, and experts focused on product management. And not only we are communicating in these types of webinars, we have various other aspects of communication and enabling each other to actually do our work around product managers. Around product management better and actually empowering the community. One of the things that we should, that I'm sure you're all aware of, is the Software Product Management Summit of 2020 is going to be in Frankfurt, Germany on the 15th and 16th of September 2020. So we hope that you all join us there. One of the reasons that we had set up this online webinar sessions is actually to generate a discussion and communication towards the Software Product Management Summit in September. So we have a great lineup, and we encourage you to look at what we have, and I think you'll find it very useful and very empowering to be part of this event. With that, and without further ado, I would like to pass the speech to David Fradin, and just a few words of introduction. David was classically trained as an HP product manager and was then recruited by Apple to bring the first hard disk drive on the PC to market, and later became the Apple III business unit manager, and at the same level as Steve Jobs. So we have the privilege here to be with someone who's really a veteran of the software industry. David is also the author of Building Insanely Great Products, Organizing and Managing Insanely Great Products, which was published by Wiley. I have to say that I read this book a little while ago, and I found it fascinating, really very, very insightful, and I think it'll be great. And I would like to encourage everyone on this call to read the book. I think it's a must for any product manager. And with that, I'd like to let David present his slides.
Great. So what I'm going to talk about is market research that actually works. And these are the 5 objectives that I have for the webinar in the next 20 minutes or so. Is for you to be able to learn what your customer wants to do, enable you to prioritize your product's features. And one of the questions was how to use market research to influence your roadmap. So I'll cover that on that learning objective. That then enables you to identify the minimum viable product that everyone's been talking about over the last 5 or 10 years. And then because you're doing this market research from the bottom up instead of the top down, it gives you a methodology to be able to estimate the market size. And from that, you can make your sales forecasts. And the ultimate result of understanding what your customer wants to do is it makes it very easy for you to write the value proposition. I don't know if you've been in this position, but I was talking with Steve Johnson a few years ago, and he's the only person in the world that's taught more product managers than I have. And he said if he had a nickel for every time engineering finishes a product and hands it off to him to take it to market, and he has to figure out what the value proposition is to find some customers. And frequently what happens is we come up with an incorrect value proposition and the product fails in the marketplace. And that's one of the reasons that about 40% of all new products, representing a waste of about $500 billion to $1 trillion occurs each year, is because we haven't really figured out the market research that I'm covering in this webinar. A little bit more background on myself. The book, Successful Product Design and Management, is from Wiley. As was mentioned, I brought the first hard disk drive to market on a PC. It was on the Apple III. It was a cheap hard drive. It was only $3,600, and it had an enormous storage capacity of 5 megabytes. So you can get an idea of how far the industry's come over the last 30 or so years. This is the Building Insanely Great Products book that covers the 6 keys to product success. And it's available as a Kindle book and in many cases as a paperback on Amazon worldwide. And then this is the book, Successful Product Design and Management Toolkit. It's a small pamphlet. It's only 796 pages, and it covers all of the topics that you see listed here. The fundamentals, which we're talking about today, the 32 parts of the product market strategy, the marketing of the products, the business skills, user experience and interface, product engineering, and product support. And then here are some suggested viewing and reading materials, which will go into more depth on these topics. And we'll be sending you a PDF of all of these slides, so you don't have to jot these things down right now. You'll get all of these links and references through the slides. Here are the 6 keys to product success. Are you able to see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. And it just happens to be the acronym SPICE. Strategy, you have to have a product market strategy. Process, you have to have a repeatable process that's becoming mature. Information about your customers, your market, your competition. Information about your customer, which is the C, and then engagement. And all of this is based upon a product management lifecycle framework that I developed, which is very similar to the Software Product Management Association. The upper part of this is what product managers do. The lower part is what product marketing managers do. And the funny thing about product managers is that they go by about 400 different titles, and they all pretty much do the same thing. One of the titles they should not go under is product owner. That's a person that runs the scrum. That's a tactical person. A product manager and a product marketing manager are strategic people. And one of the unique things about this framework is you notice up here in the product management role, I have personas. As many of you know, the personas developed in marketing and in advertising a few years ago. And I thought it'd be best to do it as you're putting together your strategy so that you can show your development engineers the people or the customer that they're actually developing the product for. Now, the things that we're talking about today is at the beginning of the discovery stage of the product market strategy. So here are the keys to successful product, and I call it DO. And that's understanding what it is that your customer wants to do, and I'll give you the key questions for that in a moment. What is the job that needs to be done, which is a notion developed by Stratagem up in San Francisco and a fellow by the name of Tony Ulrich. And he builds upon the work of a Harvard professor that has written a number of books entitled Outcome-Based Innovation. I found that the job is too large of a thing to be able to swallow. For example, if I want to go from Singapore to Bangalore to give a speech, that's the job to be done. But the things that I need to do is I need to figure out how I'm going to get from the hotel to the airport, what kind of vehicle or what mode of transportation, what time do I need to leave, and so forth. So that's why I break it down to very specific granular do's. From that, We understand how to do them, and that's when innovation, which is lately a very hot topic, and innovation is really nothing more than being able to do things faster, better, better quality, or with style. And that's when design thinking comes in, and the beginning of design thinking, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, is understanding what your customer wants to do. From that, you can then derive the value proposition, and then do your market and competitive research. One of the questions was, how do you find out what the competitors are building? Well, if they are also following the same philosophy, then as you discover the unmet needs that the market has, and if they're following this same strategy, then you'll know that they'll be developing products for pretty much the same problems that you're developing products for. On the other hand, many of them ideate, and they just come up with ideas. And if you look at their website, if they're a public company and they file public documents, you could even call them up and ask them to give you a proposal while you pretend that you're a prospective customer. So those are some of the techniques that product managers have used over the years to do their competitive research. From that, you can then do what I think is the most important thing that a product manager could ever do, and that is product positioning, how you position your product in the mind of the customer. And then you put together your pricing strategy, which is based upon everything that I've talked about up until now, such that it fits. And then you go to market. So you can't ask your customer what it is that they want to do, because they really don't. The story goes that Henry Ford allegedly asked people if they wanted a car, and the response was, no, I don't want a car, I just want a faster horse. Well, if he had gone out and just observed people, he would have noticed they were galloping their horses and their horses and carriages from place to place as fast as they possibly could do. So what people wanted to do was to get from point A to point B faster, get their goods from point A to point B faster. And you can discover that by observing what they do. This has been the strategy of Procter & Gamble for over 150 years, where they go out and observe what their target persona customers are doing. And they break it into a group of 40. They watch the first 10 for a week, the next 10 for a week, the next 10 for another week, and the last 10 for the final week. And they find by the time they get to the final week of their observations, about 80% of what they need to identify has already been identified, and it begins to approach the law of diminishing returns. So what you're trying to do is understand what it is that the customer wants to do. At first, you do it by observing what they're doing. Then you interview them, and you develop the interview instrument such that you can then make corrections to it and get rid of questions like, when did you stop beating your wife? And then you go out and get a representative sample of your market and send them a survey. And then if you're lucky and you have big data available, you could use analytics in order to identify what people are going to do. However, in the case of Henry Ford and the car, let's just assume for a moment the internet existed then. And Henry went onto the internet and used the Google tools to look up how many people are searching for the word car or the word automobile in the early 1900s. And of course, since nobody's ever heard of such a product before, there would be no searches, and therefore there was no need, no market for cars and automobiles. And hence all of our traffic and parking lots are mere illusions of what's going on. So that's one of the dangers of big data, and also the wisdom of the crowds notion. If the crowds are so wise, then how come when a fire breaks out in a nightclub, everybody is so smart they all try to go out through the same door at the same time? And that's the same phenomena that the Russians have been using to spread disinformation in the case of the US election and many of the elections in Europe over the past few years, is that the wisdom of the crowds can't easily get completely out of control. They become more like a mob. So be careful with that in those two respects with regard to big data. So here are the questions to ask in your, I watch for your observations and in your interviews and surveys. What does your customer do? How do they do that? What's their difficulties? What's the ideal solution? When do they do it? Or why do they do it? Or what is the outcome that they want to achieve? Where do they do it? Who do they do it with or for? what's standing in their way, how important is getting that thing done, and then the most important question, which will lead to determining what the opportunity is how satisfied are they with the current solution. So if they say, for example, getting ink onto a piece of paper is very, very important, but they're really satisfied with Bic pens or something like that, the opportunity to break into that market goes way down. Yet prioritizing things in order to lay out features for a product roadmap typically is done only on importance alone and does not take into consideration satisfaction. Then you slip into the design thinking process where, as a result of your observations, you're empathizing with your customer. You're beginning to define the product, ideate on the product, build a prototype, test, and then iterate back again very quickly. That's what design thinking is all about. The goal here is to come up with 15 unmet needs, and that equals your minimum viable product. And this is results from Tony Ulrich at Synergem based upon his studies over the years. And if you come out with a product that does not achieve at least 15 unmet needs, then it's probably not going to be that successful of a product in the marketplace. And along those lines, as I talked about, let's suppose you've got these 3 features, and these are the importances given to it based upon your surveys or your interviews. And these are the satisfactions that people have in terms of those features or problems they're trying to solve. And if you use this formula, importance equals importance plus importance minus satisfaction equals opportunity, what you'll see here is the first feature you probably develop is this number 1 here, because that has the highest number. But if you follow just importance, you would have developed feature number 2 first and feature number 1 later. So that's why it's so important to take into account satisfaction with how things are currently being done. Then with that information in mind and answering the following questions, how many people have the same thing that they're trying to do, how frequently they do it, how satisfied are they, how much resources, time and money are they spending to get that done, what might they be willing to spend, which begins to give you an idea of what your pricing ought to be, and how much time will they have to do that. So in this example here, let's suppose you find 1 million people that have the same thing that they want to do, and they do it 60 times a day. They're not satisfied with the current solution. They spend about a half an hour a day, and at their pay rate, say $20 an hour, that's costing them 10 bucks. Maybe they'd be willing to spend $50 on your product, and that tells you that the market is a little over $3 billion. So that's how you can forecast your market from the bottom up. And in closing, what you're driving at is the value proposition. That's where the perceived cost is less than the perceived value. And here's a little template that I put together, building upon product description templates and persona templates, where you write out the name of your product provides, the value that you're going to offer to go to the whatever the market is, and the market description with the benefit, and then you list the benefits. While these alternatives exist, and you list the competitors and alternatives, your product provides, and then it sums up in the overall proof of value. Then of course you pull out these little headers and you turn this into 2 or 3 sentences. So here's some information to connect with me, David Fradin on LinkedIn. My email address is dave@SpiceCatalyst. All of this information is up on my website at spicecatalyst.com. And I offer a number of workshops and online courses, which you can find on my website that cover these topics. So let me open it up to questions.
Yeah, please use the chat box to put your questions through, and we can answer them. But while everyone is waiting, David, I'd like to ask one question. You spoke about the role of the product owner, and I'm wondering how, and you mentioned that obviously there's a difference between a product owner and a product manager, which is sometimes a little bit ambiguous in some companies. And I wonder to what extent do you feel like a product manager can take an additional role of the product owner, or is it relevant to the type of context that the company is in?
I think in the larger organizations, it's impossible for the product manager to also be the product owner. There are 32 key components to a product market strategy. Many of them are listed up here on the slide that I'm showing. And to answer one of the questions was marketing strategy, understanding how it influences the product roadmap and strategy. All of these things come into play in order to put together your product roadmap or your product portfolio. And by the way, this question is marketing strategy. This is market strategy, and people tend to use those two terms interchangeably. The market is like a grocery store where you go to buy something, and your product market strategy is the strategy for your product for that particular grocery store or that market. Marketing strategy is things like your messaging, your promotions, your packaging, your bundling, your media, your mix, your advertising, PR plan, content plan, social media plan, and those kinds of things. That's getting people to go to the store. Marketing is getting people to go to the store, and they're different. To come back to your question, you have to think strategically as a product manager. A product owner has to think tactically to get the scrum running properly, to make sure the stories are available when they need to be available. And it's very difficult for a person to switch in their brain from strategic thinking into tactical thinking. It's easy to go that way, but it's harder to go back to strategic thinking in that same day. And that's why I strongly recommend against that.
What about very small companies? Do you think it's possible there?
Well, you have no choice. Yeah, you have no choice. What you might be able to do is try to recruit one of the engineers that has good communication skills and get them trained as a product owner. One of the most difficult things to do in all of that is writing the stories for agile development. However, if you follow my philosophy here in terms of understanding what people do, I have a template where it lets you write a do statement for each of the things that a person wants to do or a company wants to do. And it's really easy to translate that into a story for agile development.
Another question, just looking at this slide, to what extent, to what extent can we see this as a linear process, as can be implied by the way we're presenting this slide, and to what extent this is like more chaotic? You know, do you see this in real life as you're doing one thing and then another thing and then another thing, or what's your experience about trying to implement these kind of methodologies within a real life situation within a company? Are people accepting this structure? What are the challenges?
Good question. Where I have the arrows, I believe very strongly that these things need to be done in exactly this order. Now, that doesn't mean you don't iterate and go back in agile fashion and improve these. But for example, let's suppose you wanted to jump right in and do your product positioning. And at HP, we were taught the first thing we do for a product is write a press release, which is the product's position. It's impossible to do that unless you understand what the product's going to do for the customer, what kind of innovation is going to be brought aboard, what's the use scenarios, what's the opportunity and risks, what's the value proposition, who is the customer, that is the personas you're targeting it to, what is the market like today, and what is the competition, and what's the technology developments that are going to occur. It's impossible to write a good positioning statement without having all of that information immediately at hand. And that's also true for many of these other things further down in the arrows. You can't do pricing right from the beginning. Typically what people jump in is they do the positioning statement, pick a price, and go to market without all of this other research done. Then that has to be picked up down here in the marketing area to correct any potential mistakes. And that's related to a question we just got, is what's my view on using market research agencies compared to doing research on your own? Well, it depends upon what your bandwidth is. This process of understanding what your customer wants to do is about 1 calendar month. Then you've got to do the interviews. That's probably another calendar month. And then the surveys might be another calendar month. And then there's always delays in between trying to get responses. So to do this well, you need at least 3 to 6 calendar months. However, a lot of companies say, no, I don't have time to do that. So they prefer to rush to market and waste all the money that they spend on product development and find out in the marketplace that the product just doesn't fit. So if you can find a market research agency that gives you a larger bandwidth to get this done, then by all means do it. I was retained a few months ago by a SaaS company that does product lifecycle management, SaaS software, and they had me do these things, observe what's being done, interview their existing customers, and then survey their existing customers and give them a report back so that they could then build a product roadmap. They have 3 product managers. They retained me because they didn't have the bandwidth to spend full time on it for 3 months.
So it's mostly a bandwidth issue. So if you,
yes.
you have your bandwidth, then you should do it yourself.
Right, if you have the bandwidth.
What about the ability of your staff to conduct market research? I mean, is there any set? Can you buy into the notion of having a professional market research company that has the insights that maybe a product manager would not be able to
that depends upon the experience level of the product manager in 2 areas. One is domain experience and knowledge, and second, the ability to do market research. Most of us as engineers were never trained how to do a survey or how to interview somebody. So we'll tend to offer the solutions and say, what do you think of doing this? Or the other questions we'll have is, when did you stop beating your wife? And you have to eliminate all of those biases. And if you haven't been trained on how to do that, I happen to be lucky to have a course at University of Michigan specifically on how to write surveys. So it's a person that's been trained at a collegiate level on how to do interviews and surveys without changing the results of the survey, without biasing the survey.
Right. And that's a skill that a product manager should have.
Yeah, if the product manager doesn't have it, they can develop it, or they should hire someone that has that skill.
Right. I'm trying to see if we have other questions. I would like to ask you, from your perspective, as someone who's been in this industry and with product management for a while, I wonder, how do you see this this role changing? Has it changed? In what aspect has it changed? How do you compare product managers today to what you were doing in HP, a few decades ago?
Well, it's pretty much the same. That hasn't changed. And the notion of product management at HP came from Procter & Gamble, and then it spread from HP throughout Silicon Valley, and now it's spreading around the world. 10 years ago, there was only like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 major conferences for product managers. Now there's probably a couple of dozen, anywhere from Germany, as you know, and France, and Switzerland, to Singapore, to India, to Australia. And I think people are beginning to realize that the product manager and that role is critical to product success. However, as I have a suggested memo on my website, which was first published by the Software Product Managers Association, it's a memo you can send to your boss that says, boss, can I change my title to Product Success Manager, which really describes exactly what we do, that we are responsible for the product's success. So I encourage everyone on their LinkedIn profile to change it to Product Success Manager, and we'll help get this snowball rolling downhill a little bit faster.
Yeah. I'd like to turn to the audience and see if there's any other questions. And maybe I would like to ask the audience to what extent, I mean, the people that have mentioned their expectations, you know, where they answered what is the number one thing I would like to get from this webinar. Uh, what's your take on this? Is there anything that else that you could take from this webinar? What do you think? Please answer in the chat. While we're waiting, David, just anything you can tell us about the type of background that you usually expect for product managers? You know, where are they mostly engineers that have moved to product management? Are they mostly coming fresh from university? What's your experience as far as the roadmap for a product manager to become a product manager?
Yeah, you're right. Most of them come from engineering. A few come from customer support, pre-sales engineers, that type of thing. A few come in from business development. Very few from sales, a few from marketing. Very few get this training in colleges and universities. Only colleges like Berkeley, University of Wisconsin. There's a university in France that also holds an executive courses like this in Singapore also. And that was one of the reasons behind a successful product management. The book from Wiley is to provide a MBA level curriculum that leading universities around the world can pick up and start teaching the subject. Just got a question on, you have worked on hardware products as well. What is your view on the difference between hardware and software product management? I think there's pretty much no difference, other than the fact that iterations of refinements and improvements are much faster, obviously, in software than there is in hardware. On the other hand, if you design the hardware so that you can update and improve the firmware, it begins to take on those same characteristics. At Apple, after Steve came back, he would get together with his industrial design team led by Johnny Ive every Wednesday morning. And they had numerical controlled machines and 3D printers in that facility. And they would print up prototypes and they would be able to handle them and touch them and feel them. And that's one of the reasons why when you pick up an iPhone or an iPad or a Macintosh, it feels so good in your hand. It's because they were going through the same kind of agile hardware development that people do in agile software development. Next person says, very useful details and detailed information shared. Software product management is not simple and marketing plays a very critical role. Thanks for taking the time for this webinar. You're welcome.
Okay. Within this chart and methodology, anything that you would point out as like being central to product management? I mean, what would be like it's a very rich environment, and I wonder if you would, if someone asks you what are the key success factors for a product manager, what would you say?
Well, it's this slide that you see up here now.
Yeah.
To understand all of the components of the product market strategy. And then the other key slide is this one here. Whoops. Understanding exactly what it is that your customer wants to do by getting answers to those questions. That's the most important thing. Okay. Now, politically, sometimes you get into an organization and the CEO thinks they have the answer to this, but it's never been verified with data. The key is to be able to verify it with actual data. Okay. Got a couple more questions. What's your advice for someone seeking into a PM role from operations customer support? How can they transition? What you need to be able to demonstrate to the hiring manager is that you know how to do the job. And the best way to do that is take one or more of my courses, which are up on Udemy, and they all come with a workbook, or the workbooks are available for sale on Amazon. And take the product management strategy course in the Do Innovation, Design Thinking, and Value Proposition course. Fill out those workbooks for some product that you pick. It doesn't really matter what the product is. Then when you go in for your interview for a product manager job, you can kind of show this to your hiring manager as your portfolio, demonstrating that you know how to do it. I have a intern in India for the last couple of years, and she's been through my courses and helped me out in marketing, and she was getting a master's in electrical engineering. And as a result, she could demonstrate she knew how to do product management. She got hired as a product manager right out of college as a result of being associated with my courses, my books, and content. Next question is, what would be your advice for building a process for validation of the done work? How to organize reviews of work done by development if they meet the needs? How is product managers involved in this? That's very much sort of the quality assurance, the quality control aspect of what, for all practical purposes, we used to call the beta test years ago. But that's going on in an agile fashion in many developments. So you need to identify first the metrics for product success, and then figure out a way to measure the results of those metrics. Net promoter score is one technique that people are using, but in my experience with it, and there are a number of articles about it on the web, it's not a realistic response. I'll give you an example. On this SaaS product I was consulting on a few months ago, they had about 200 people respond to the net provider scores off their website. A bunch of them were irritated. They were constantly being asked what they think of the product. And I sent out a survey to all 200 of them that bothered to respond, to ask them if they would take a little bit of time to answer some questions. Guess how many people responded? And you would think it would be very important to them that we would be able to improve the product to help them do their job better. And I would have expected maybe 50 to 75 would respond. Actually, 3 responded. So we went back at them again and said, we'll give you a $50 gift certificate to buy something on Amazon. Guess how many people would respond? I figured it'd be at least 100, 125. No, only 25 responded. So it's extremely difficult to get the feedback you need to know whether or not the product is being validated in the workplace. You just have to get clever about it and adapt in order to get the responses.
Okay.
Well, by the way, in this example, we gave them $50 if they participated.
Really?
We did not run a contest of being possible. Maybe someday you might win the lottery and get your $50, which is what a lot of companies do. And I don't believe very strongly in those lotteries to enter a chance to win, because I never win anything anyway.
Thank you very much, David. We're just about to wrap up, and we're done with our time. So really,
another question: what would your advice for building a process for validation of the done work? Oh, I think we have that. Oh, he just added, "Thank you, very insightful."
Yeah,
I was always suspicious about NPS. Yes, them and the Russians.
So again, thank you very much. I would like to go to the last slide, please, so we can also present our next webinar. As you all know, or I hope you all know, this is a webinar series. We have our webinars every Thursday at 5 o'clock Central European Summit Time. And our next discussion is going to be with Dylan Patel on one of the most exciting things in product management. It's about embedded analytics. So how do you really measure things within your product? And it's good. And Dylan is going to give us a blueprint for delivering an embedded analytics solution. So I hope that all of you can join us. I want to thank David again for joining us on this call. It's relatively early in California now, so appreciate you waking up with us, and I appreciate your time, and thank all of you for joining us, and looking forward to see you next time. So thanks very much, and bye-bye.